For 80 years, he watched planes fly overhead, wondering what it would feel like to be up there, above the clouds, where the world looked small and the sky stretched forever. Every time he saw one, he would pause, tilt his head, and imagine, just for a moment, what it would be like to leave the ground, to rise above everything he had ever known. But dreaming was all he did. Life, as it often does, had other plans. Walter Harris had lived his whole life in the same small town in Indiana, surrounded by fields that seemed to go on forever, but never once had he left the earth beneath his feet. The sky was a distant place, something for other people to explore. He was content, or at least he told himself he was. Yet, there was always that pull, that quiet longing that never truly faded. As a boy, Walter would lay on the grass outside his family's farmhouse, watching the contrails stretch across the blue sky, his young mind filled with wonder. Back then, flying seemed like something magical, something only pilots and adventurers did, not boys from farms with calloused hands and chores to finish. His father used to say, "The sky's too far, son. Keep your feet on the ground." And so he did. Years turned into decades. Walter worked hard, married his sweetheart Helen, raised 3 children, and built a life rooted in simplicity and love. But the dream remained, quiet and patient, waiting for a day that never seemed to come. Until now. At 80 years old, Walter had long accepted that flying was something he would never experience. But what he didn't know was that life was about to offer him one last chance to touch the sky. Walter lived in a small white house at the edge of town, the same house he and Helen had moved into just after their wedding in 1967. The porch creaked under his steps, the garden was always neat, and every morning at exactly 7 o'clock, he sat by the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, black, no sugar. He liked watching the world wake up slowly, the mailman passing by, kids riding bikes to school, and sometimes, if he was lucky, a plane tracing its silent path above. His days were peaceful, predictable. After Helen passed 5 years ago, the house had become quieter, filled with memories and the soft ticking of the old clock she loved. Their children lived in different states now, visiting when they could, calling on Sundays. Walter didn't mind the solitude, or at least, that's what he told himself. He had his books, his garden, and the radio shows he still enjoyed, the same voices he'd listened to for decades. But when night came, and the world outside turned still, that old dream would find its way back to him. He'd sit in his favorite chair, look at the stars, and wonder why he had never done it. Why he had never stepped onto a plane, felt the rush of takeoff, or seen the world from above. It wasn't fear, not really. Walter wasn't afraid of heights or flying. It was more about life getting in the way. There was always something more important, bills to pay, children to raise, work to be done. And as the years passed, the dream seemed smaller, distant, almost foolish. "I'm too old for that now," he would think. That was a young man's wish. But deep inside, he knew it was more than just a wish. It was a part of him he had never let go of, even if he had tried. And what Walter didn't know, sitting there in his quiet house, was that the sky hadn't forgotten him. That dream, long buried under years of routine, was about to rise again. Walter's life had always been about doing the right thing, about being dependable. He grew up in a time when dreams were often set aside for duty, and that's exactly what he did. His father taught him early that hard work was the measure of a man, and Walter took those words to heart. From the age of 16, he worked alongside his father on the family farm, rising before the sun, tending to the fields, and making sure the animals were fed before the day truly began. There was no time for flying, no space for adventures. The farm needed him, his family needed him, and dreams, well, dreams could wait. After he married Helen, life became about providing. He got a job at the local grain mill, working long shifts, his hands rough from years of labor. The idea of spending money on something like a flight seemed almost selfish. They had children to think about, Paul, Susan, and Michael, and every dollar was counted. He wanted them to have what he never did: opportunities, education, a life beyond the limits he had accepted. Every now and then, though, something would stir inside him. A commercial on the old RCA television, showing families on vacation, boarding planes, smiling at new adventures. A postcard from a friend who had visited California, describing the view from 30,000 feet. And always, that familiar ache when he heard the hum of an airplane overhead. Helen knew, of course. She always knew. On quiet nights, when the kids were asleep and the world outside seemed far away, she would turn to him and say, "Someday, Walter, we'll fly somewhere, just you and me." He would nod, kiss her forehead, and promise, someday. But someday never came. Time passed as it does. The kids grew up, moved out, built lives of their own. Walter retired from the mill, his body older, but his mind still sharp. Helen's health began to fade, slowly at first, then all at once. The hospital visits, the medications, the long nights at her side, they took everything he had left. When she passed, something in him went silent, like a door closing softly in the dark. The dream of flying felt foolish now. He was alone, too old, too tired. The sky, once so full of wonder, seemed unreachable. But even then, even in those quietest moments, a part of him still looked up. It was on a Sunday afternoon, during one of those rare visits, that everything began to change. Walter's youngest son, Michael, had come from Chicago to spend the weekend. They sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees, the air warm with the scent of freshly cut grass. Michael had always been the more adventurous of the three children, the one who traveled for work, who sent photos from places Walter had only ever heard about. As they talked about life, about how fast the years had gone by, Michael paused, looking at his father with a thoughtful expression. "Dad," he said, "is there anything you've always wanted to do but never got the chance?" Walter chuckled, shaking his head. "At my age, son, I've done what I could. Life's been good to me." Michael didn't smile. He just kept looking, waiting. "Well," Walter hesitated, his voice softer. "I've always wondered what it'd be like to fly, to get on a plane, see the world from above." Michael leaned back in his chair, eyes wide with surprise. "You've never flown?" Walter shook his head. "Never." There was a silence between them, not heavy, but thoughtful. Michael leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Then why don't we do it?" he asked. Walter looked at him, eyebrows raised. "Do what?" "Fly. Just a short trip. Nothing big. But let's get you on a plane." Walter laughed, almost out of reflex. "Michael, come on. I'm too old for that now." "No, you're not," Michael said firmly. "You're 80, not gone. You can still do this." The idea seemed ridiculous. At his age? After all these years? But that night, after Michael had gone to bed, Walter sat alone in the living room, the clock ticking softly. He looked at a photo of Helen, her smile still warm after all this time. "Someday," he whispered to the empty room. Maybe someday was now. Over the next few days, Walter couldn't shake the thought. What would it feel like? The hum of the engines, the liftoff, the view. His heart would race just thinking about it. But alongside the excitement came fear. Not fear of flying, but fear of change, of stepping into something unknown after so long. Then, a week later, Michael called. "I booked us a flight, Dad. Just to St. Louis. 1 hour. Round trip. What do you say?" Walter closed his eyes, breathing deeply. "Let's do it." The days leading up to the flight felt different. Walter's routine, once so steady, now had a spark he hadn't felt in years. Each morning, he woke with a mix of excitement and nerves. He found himself standing by the window more often, watching the sky, imagining the view from above. Michael called often, checking in, making sure Walter was ready. "Pack light," he'd say, laughing. "We're only going for a day." But to Walter, this wasn't just a trip. It was a moment, a milestone, a dream coming to life. The night before the flight, Walter laid out his clothes carefully. His best pair of slacks, a crisp white shirt, and the watch Helen had given him on their 25th anniversary. He ran his fingers over the leather band, remembering the day she placed it on his wrist, her eyes full of love. "You're always on time," she had said, smiling. Sleep didn't come easily that night. His mind was filled with thoughts, not just of flying, but of everything that had led to this. The sacrifices, the waiting, the years that seemed to slip by like pages in an old book. And now, here he was, on the edge of something new. The next morning, Michael arrived early, a smile on his face and a sparkle in his eyes. "Ready, Dad?" Walter nodded, his heart pounding. "Let's go." The drive to the airport was quiet, but comfortable. Walter watched the scenery pass, fields, roads, towns, the same ones he had known all his life. But today, they looked different, as if the world itself knew something special was about to happen. When they arrived, Walter stood in awe at the size of the terminal. He had never seen anything like it. People rushing, announcements echoing, the scent of coffee and jet fuel in the air. Michael stayed close, guiding him through check-in, security, and finally to the gate. Sitting by the window, Walter stared at the planes outside, watching them taxi, lift off, disappear into the sky. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes were bright, filled with wonder. "They look smaller up close," he said softly. Michael smiled. "Wait till you're inside one." When the time came to board, Walter stood slowly, his legs steady but his heart racing. The line moved quickly, and before he knew it, he was stepping onto the jet bridge, the hum of the engines growing louder with each step. And then he was inside. The seats, the lights, the narrow aisle. It was all so new, yet somehow familiar, like stepping into a dream he had dreamed 1,000 times before. He sat by the window, buckling his seatbelt carefully, his eyes fixed outside. Michael leaned over. "How you doing?" Walter took a deep breath. "I'm ready." But nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to feel. The engines roared to life, a deep, steady hum that seemed to vibrate through the floor and into Walter's chest. He glanced out the window, watching the ground crew move with purpose, lights blinking in the early morning haze. The plane began to roll slowly, turning onto the runway. Walter's hands gripped the armrests, not from fear, but from something deeper, anticipation, awe, a lifetime of waiting about to end. Michael leaned over, his voice calm. "This is it, Dad." Walter nodded, his throat tight. The plane paused at the edge of the runway, engines building power, a low rumble growing louder. Then, with a sudden surge, they were moving faster and faster, the world outside blurring into streaks of color. Walter pressed his back into the seat, feeling the force, the pull, the incredible power as the plane lifted from the ground. And then, they were airborne. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He just stared, wide-eyed, as the earth dropped away beneath them, houses shrinking, roads twisting like ribbons, fields turning into patterns only visible from the sky. The clouds seemed to rise up to meet them, soft and white, floating alongside the wings. Walter's breath caught in his throat. "We're flying," he whispered, almost to himself. "I'm really flying." Michael smiled, placing a hand gently on his father's arm. "You're in the sky, Dad." Tears welled in Walter's eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. He wanted to feel everything, the lightness in his chest, the pressure in his ears, the way the sunlight streamed through the small window, casting golden patterns on his hands. He turned his head, looking out in every direction, trying to take it all in. The sky stretched endlessly, blue and open, filled with possibilities. Below, the land seemed peaceful, distant, like a painting come to life. Memories flooded his mind. The boy laying in the grass, the young man watching planes, the husband who promised someday. And now, here he was, above it all, part of the sky he had only ever dreamed of. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small photo of Helen, worn at the edges, her smile still as bright as the day they took it. He held it gently, lifting it toward the window. "We made it, sweetheart," he whispered. The flight was short, but to Walter, it felt timeless. Every second was a treasure, every sound, every sight etched into his memory. He didn't want it to end, but when the pilot announced their descent, he felt no sadness, only gratitude. As the plane touched down, wheels skimming the runway, Walter smiled, a deep, content smile that seemed to light up his whole face. He had done it. After 80 years on the ground, Walter Harris had touched the sky. Back on the ground, Walter walked through the airport with a lightness in his step he hadn't felt in years. The same terminal that had seemed so overwhelming just hours before now felt familiar, almost welcoming. People hurried past, announcements echoed overhead, but Walter wasn't in a rush. He was still up there, somewhere between the clouds and his heart. Michael glanced at him, curious. "So, what did you think?" Walter paused, looking around as if searching for the right words. "It's hard to explain," he said slowly. "It wasn't just the flying, it was the feeling. Like I was free. Like I could do anything." They drove home in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after something extraordinary. Walter rested his hand on the window, watching the world pass by. But this time, everything looked different. The roads, the trees, the sky. It all felt bigger, more open, as if possibilities had found their way into every corner of his life. When they arrived, Walter stood on his porch, looking up at the sky. The same sky he had watched his whole life, now forever changed. In the days that followed, something shifted inside him. He smiled more, laughed easily, and when neighbors asked about his trip, his eyes lit up. He told them about the view, about the clouds, about how small the world looked from above, and how big it made him feel. But more than that, he told them about dreams. How they never truly die, even when we think we've outgrown them. How they wait, quietly, for us to believe again. Walter started writing letters to his grandchildren, telling them about his flight, urging them to chase their own dreams, no matter how long it takes. He even joked with Michael about taking another trip, maybe somewhere farther this time. Because for Walter, that one flight wasn't just the end of a dream, it was the beginning of something new. Walter often found himself thinking about that flight, especially in the quiet moments, early in the morning, or as the sun set behind the trees. It wasn't just the memory of the sky that stayed with him, but the feeling of doing something he thought was lost to time. One afternoon, sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee in hand, he reflected on it all. We spend so much of our lives waiting, he thought, waiting for the right time, for everything to be perfect. But sometimes, all we need is to say yes. He realized that fear, routine, and doubt had kept him grounded more than anything else. It wasn't age or circumstance. It was believing that dreams had an expiration date. But they don't. Dreams are patient. They wait for us to be ready. And now, Walter wanted others to know this too. That it's never too late. Not for flying, not for living, not for anything that truly matters. If you've stayed with me until now, thank you for being part of this journey. Walter's story is more than just about flying. It's about hope, about taking chances, about believing in yourself, no matter how many years have passed. Maybe you have a dream, something simple, something you've always wanted but never dared to do. Maybe you've told yourself it's too late, or you're too old. But let me ask you, what if it's not? What if your moment is still waiting? If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. What dream have you always carried with you? Is there something you still hope to do? Share it in the comments, because here, we believe in dreams, and we believe in you. Don't forget to like this video if it meant something to you, and subscribe to be part of this beautiful community of dreamers. We have more stories to share, more hearts to inspire, because it's never too late to dream.